The morning sun painted soft gold across the windows of the small city cafe, and the smell of roasted coffee floated through the air. As Emily wiped the counter with tired hands, her shift had started before dawn, and her mind was already heavy. But when the doorbell chimed, she looked up and everything seemed to slow down for a moment, because that was when the millionaire walked in. His name was Mr. Dalton, and everyone in the cafe knew who he was. The man with money, kindness, and a smile that could light up a room. He came every morning around the same time, always in a navy suit with his silver watch glinting under the lights, always polite, always gentle with his words. And Emily liked serving him because he was never rude, never demanding. He often asked about her studies and once even left her a large tip saying it was for her dreams. She thought he was the kind of man who could never do wrong. But that morning something felt different because he was not alone. A second man followed him wearing dark glasses even though the cafe was bright. His steps were slow, his eyes cold, his suit more expensive, and his smile looked like it was hiding something behind it. Emily felt a strange chill as the two men sat near the window and began talking in low voices. She tried not to stare, but her eyes kept drifting toward them while she prepared their order. She heard a soft metallic click and glanced over just in time to see the second man sliding a small silver object into Dalton's briefcase before closing it quietly with a faint grin. Emily froze, her heart beating faster. She did not know what it was, but something about that motion looked secret and wrong. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed their cups on the tray and walked toward the table. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Here is your coffee, sir." Mr. Dalton smiled warmly. "Thank you, Emily. Always perfect as usual." And then he looked at his friend and laughed lightly. "This is Victor, my business partner." Victor looked up, his smile thin and sharp, like a blade cutting through her calm. He said, "Pleasure to meet you, miss." And his tone made her uncomfortable. She nodded quickly and placed the coffee down. But when her eyes met his, she saw a flicker of warning. There, as if he already knew she had noticed what he did. She stepped back quietly, pretending to clean the next table. While her mind raced, she remembered reading his name somewhere. Victor Lane. Yes, she had seen it once in a headline about fraud and false charities, but she had brushed it off until now. Mr. Dalton talked about donations and new contracts while Victor nodded and smiled like a loyal friend. But Emily could see that something was wrong, the way Victor's fingers tapped on the table, the way he kept watching Dalton's briefcase every few seconds. She bit her lip, debating with herself whether to say something or stay quiet. She had learned long ago that rich men did not like being warned by waitresses, but her gut kept whispering something is not right. When Dalton stood up to leave, she could not stop herself. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried after him, her heart pounding. She caught him just outside the cafe and said softly, "Sir, please, I think you should check your briefcase before you go." He turned to her, surprised, and asked why, what's wrong. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Your friend Victor. He put something inside when you weren't looking. Maybe it's nothing, but maybe it's important." Dalton looked puzzled, then smiled kindly. "Almost amused, my dear, you must be mistaken. Victor has been my partner for 15 years. He would never hide anything from me. He trusts me, and I trust him." He laughed lightly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But thank you for worrying. You have a good heart." Emily felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and fear. She wanted to insist, but his calm tone silenced her. He walked away to his car while Victor followed a few steps behind, turning once to give her that same slow smile that made her skin crawl. As the car drove off, Emily stood by the cafe door, unable to shake the feeling that she had just made a huge mistake. Maybe she should have said more. Maybe she should have told him about the headline or the strange look in Victor's eyes, but now it was too late. The city moved around her like nothing had happened. Cars honking, people laughing, the smell of coffee still strong in the air. Yet everything inside her felt heavy and cold. Later that evening, as she closed the cafe, she found a piece of paper under the counter. Just a small white note with 2 short lines written in black ink. "Stay out of things that don't concern you." Her hands shook as she read it. She looked out the window, and for a second she thought she saw a shadow standing across the street watching her, before fading into the night. She locked the doors quickly, heart racing, and whispered to herself, "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's nothing but deep." Inside, she knew something dangerous had already begun, and the warning she gave was only the start of something far bigger than she could ever imagine. The night after the strange note arrived, Emily could not sleep, the sound of rain tapping against her window mixed with the echo of her own heartbeat. She kept replaying the moment she saw Victor's cold eyes in the cafe and the chill that followed when she read those words, "Stay out of things that don't concern you." She tried to convince herself. It was only a prank maybe from one of the other waiters, but something deep inside her whispered that it was not just a joke. Morning came too fast. The city outside looked calm, but Emily's hands still shook as she tied her apron. She kept glancing toward the door, hoping Mr. Dalton would walk in so she could warn him again. Maybe this time he would listen. The bell finally chimed, but it was not him. It was Victor alone, wearing the same dark glasses and the same lifeless smile. He sat down at her counter and said softly, "1 black coffee, please." His voice was calm but heavy like thunder before a storm. Emily forced a polite smile. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, her fingers trembling as she filled the cup. She could feel his gaze following her every move. When she placed the cup before him, he leaned forward slightly and said, "Curious girl, aren't you? You have quite an imagination, making stories about people you barely know." She froze, unsure how to respond. "I just thought something looked wrong," she whispered. Victor chuckled, a sound too quiet to be real. "You should not worry about things that can burn you, miss." He stirred his coffee slowly, watching the spoon swirl round and round, as if he were watching her fate spin with it. He said, "People who ask too many questions often disappear in silence." Then he smiled again, stood up and left, leaving a few coins on the counter. Emily stared after him, her heart pounding. The coins felt cold in her hand. When she picked them up, she noticed one coin had something scratched on its surface, a small X carved deep into the metal. She dropped it at once, feeling sick. By noon, the cafe manager called her into the office. He looked nervous, rubbing his hands together. "Emily, we got a complaint." He said, "Mr. Dalton's company doesn't want you serving them anymore. They said you were rude and caused a scene yesterday." She tried to explain, but he wouldn't listen. "I'm sorry, Emily, you're good, but I can't lose big clients. You're fired." She walked out in a daze, her apron still in her hands. Everything around her blurred like a dream. She wanted to cry, but no tears came. She just kept walking in the rain until her shoes were soaked and her breath came out in short gasps. When she finally reached her small apartment, she sank onto the couch, staring at the floor, wondering what to do next. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number read, "Sometimes silence is safer than truth." She dropped the phone, her pulse racing. Who was doing this, and why? Had she really done something wrong? Or had she stumbled into a trap built by people much stronger than her? She turned off the lights, locked the doors, and sat in the dark, listening to the faint hum of traffic outside. A few hours later, there was a knock at her door. She held her breath. Who could it be? She didn't move. The knock came again, slower this time, followed by a calm voice. "Emily, it's Mr. Dalton." She opened the door slightly and saw him standing there, drenched from the rain, his eyes tired, his smile gone. "May I come in?" he asked. She nodded, letting him inside. He looked nothing like the confident man from the cafe. He seemed older and heavier, as if he had seen something terrible. He sat down quietly and said, "You were right about Victor." Emily felt a chill climb her spine. "What do you mean?" she asked. Dalton sighed and rubbed his temples. "Last night, I checked the files on that USB. You warned me about it. Contained bank details, offshore transfers, fake donations. He took millions from my charity accounts, the same ones I built to help children. I confronted him, and now he's threatening me." Emily gasped. "Why would he do that?" Dalton looked up. "Because I know too much, and now he thinks I told someone about." Fatintiha leaned forward, eyes desperate. "I need to disappear for a while, but I came to say thank you. You tried to warn me when no one else did." Emily felt torn between fear and pity. "What can I do to help?" she whispered. Dalton hesitated, then said, "If something happens to me, promise me you'll go to this address." He handed her a folded paper. Inside were coordinates and a name written in bold letters. It will explain everything. She looked at him, unsure what to say, when suddenly they both heard a soft click from the hallway outside, like someone unlocking a door. Dalton's eyes widened. He whispered, "Turn off the lights." She moved quickly. The room sank into darkness. Footsteps echoed closer. Someone was outside the apartment. Dalton pulled her behind the couch, holding his breath. The door handle moved once, then stopped after a long silence. They heard the faint sound of retreating steps. Dalton whispered, "We have to leave. Tonight they'll come back for sure." Emily's mind spun. "Who will come?" he said quietly. "Victor's men. He controls everything. The police, the press, even my security. No one is safe anymore." She looked at him, terrified, and yet something inside her refused to break. If the world was against them, she would still stand because the truth had chosen her, whether she wanted it or not. And in that moment she realized her warning had started a war that neither of them could run from. The night was cold and heavy with silence as Emily sat near the window of her small apartment, her heart still racing from what had happened earlier. Mr. Dalton sat across from her, his hands trembling slightly as he stared at the folded paper he had given her. Hours ago, the city lights flickered through the curtains, painting faint shadows on the walls. She could see fear in his eyes, and yet behind it there was something else. Something like regret. He said quietly, "I built everything believing I could trust the people around me, but I was blind. Victor was not my friend. He was my mirror, showing me what greed looks like when you let it live too long." Emily listened, unsure what to say. She was just a waitress, a girl who served coffee and smiled through long shifts, and now she was sitting in the middle of something that felt bigger than she could understand. She whispered, "What do we do now?" Dalton looked out the window and said, "We find the truth, and we make it known." They waited until midnight before leaving the apartment, walking through the empty streets with their heads low. The rain had stopped, but the air smelled of wet concrete and danger. Dalton carried his briefcase close to his chest, while Emily followed close behind her, steps soft and quick. They reached a quiet storage building at the edge of the city. Dalton unlocked a small metal door and led her inside. The place smelled of paper dust, and old secrets boxes were stacked to the ceiling, and a single lamp flickered weakly. In the corner, Dalton placed the briefcase on a table and opened it, revealing a pile of papers, hard drives, and one small silver USB. He looked at Emily and said, "This is what he tried to hide. This is why he smiled when he lied." She stepped closer and read the papers, her eyes widening as she saw lists of fake accounts under Victor's name and photographs of him shaking hands with politicians, bankers, and people she had only ever seen on TV, all smiling as if they were untouchable. Dalton whispered, "He used my charity as a mask, but behind it, he built a network of corruption money that vanished into thin air, and I signed every paper because I believed in him." Emily felt anger rising inside her. It wasn't just about stolen money, it was about how people like Victor crushed everyone who stood in their way, including honest ones like Dalton. She said, "We can show this to the police," but Dalton shook his head. "They won't listen," he said, his voice rough. "Victor owns them. He buys truth and sells lies. If we go to them, they'll call us criminals, not him." They sat in silence for a long moment until Emily said, "Then we find someone who can't be bought. Maybe a journalist, someone brave." Dalton nodded slowly and said, "I know one. He used to investigate corporate crimes, but after his last story he vanished. Maybe we can find him again." Emily took a deep breath and said, "Let's do it." Then he smiled weakly. "You're stronger than you think." Emily suddenly, a loud crash echoed. Outside, both of them froze. Dalton turned off the lamp and pulled her behind the boxes. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Someone was inside the building. Emily held her breath as shadows moved past the dusty glass. The sound of keys jingled, and a low voice said, "Check every room." They heard the creak of doors opening one by one. Dalton whispered into her ear, "We have to go now. There's a back door. Stay close." They moved slowly, hearts pounding every step louder than thunder in their ears. They reached the back exit, But just as Dalton turned the handle, a beam of light hit the wall behind them. Someone shouted. There they ran, bursting into the dark alley, rain splashing under their feet as they sprinted through narrow streets. Victor's men chased them, their voices echoing in the night. Emily's lungs burned, her hair stuck to her face, but she didn't stop. She followed Dalton until they reached the old bridge at the edge of the river. He jumped over the railing, landing on the lower walkway. She followed, nearly slipping, but catching his hand at the last second. They hid behind the pillars, breathless. Dalton whispered, "We can't go home, not anymore. They know where we live." Emily nodded, still trying to catch her breath. Then, "Where do we go?" He thought for a moment, then said, "My late wife's cabin. It's in the woods outside the city. Nobody knows about it. We'll be safe there for a while." She nodded again, though her mind was spinning. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, the sky was beginning to brighten faintly with dawn. The road was quiet except for the sound of their footsteps and the hum of distant traffic. Emily looked at Dalton and asked softly, "What will you do once we expose him?" He smiled sadly. "I'll rebuild, but not for money this time, for peace." She didn't understand fully, but she could feel his heart in those words, and for the first time she saw him not as a millionaire, but as a man who had lost everything but still refused to give. Up they reached the cabin just as the sun broke over the hills. The air smelled of pine and wet soil. It was small and simple, yet felt like a hidden world away from the noise. Dalton unlocked the door and said, "Welcome home for now." Emily smiled faintly, feeling a strange mix of fear and safety. She stepped inside the quiet room and whispered, "I hope we can end this soon." Dalton looked out at the forest and said softly, "We will one way or another," and somewhere deep in the shadows far behind them, a black car stopped at the edge of the road, its headlights dim as two men watched the cabin in silence. The morning light filtered softly through the cracks of the old wooden cabin, and Emily woke to the sound of birds hidden in the trees. Her body still ached from the long run the night before, and her eyes felt heavy. But when she saw Mr. Dalton sitting near the window, she knew sleep would not bring peace anyway. He was staring at a stack of papers spread on the table, his face pale in the cold sunlight. She asked quietly, "Did they find us yet?" He shook his head. "Not yet, but they will soon." His voice was calm, but the fear beneath it was clear. The air outside was thick with mist, and the forest around them whispered like a living thing. Dalton told her they had to move carefully. They could not use phones or cards because Victor's men would trace every signal. Emily made coffee on an old stove, while Dalton checked a small laptop powered by a portable battery. On the screen were files he had copied before they fled, numbers, codes, names hidden under fake companies. He said, "If we can get this to the right person, we can stop him forever." She nodded, but deep down she wondered who the right person could even be in a world where truth was easily bought. As the day passed, Dalton finally found a message on an old encrypted forum. It was from a man who called himself Greyhawk, the same journalist who once exposed corporate crimes. He wrote, "I heard about Victor. Meet me in the city old train station at midnight. Come alone." Dalton stared at the screen for a long moment, then said, "This is our only chance." Emily frowned. That could be a trap. He looked at her and said, "Everything is a trap. Now we just have to choose the one worth walking into." That night, rain started again, falling hard against the windows. They packed a small bag with the evidence and waited until the forest turned dark. The road was muddy and slick as they walked toward Dalton's car hidden behind the trees, but when he tried to start the engine, nothing happened. He cursed softly. The battery was dead. Emily looked around, feeling uneasy. Something about the silence didn't feel right. Then she saw it. Faint red dots glowing through the trees. Like eyes, she grabbed his arm, whispering, "Someone's here." They ducked low behind the car just as headlights flashed through the rain. A black SUV stopped at the edge of the woods and two men stepped out holding flashlights. Their voices low and sharp spread out. "Check the cabin," one of them said. Dalton pulled Emily's hand. "Come on this way." They ran deeper into the forest, branches whipping against their faces, the ground slippery beneath their feet. Emily's breath came in short gasps, but she didn't slow. They crossed a small stream, cold water soaking their shoes before climbing up a steep hill. She could hear the men shouting behind them. Dogs barking somewhere in the distance. Dalton whispered faster. We're close to the main road. If we reach it, we can find another car. They pushed through the trees until they saw faint streetlights ahead, but before they could step out onto the road, a gunshot cracked through the night. A bullet struck the ground near their feet. Emily, screamed Dalton. Grabbed her arm, pulling her down behind a fallen tree. Stay down, he hissed. More shots followed, echoing through the rain. He looked around, desperate eyes searching for a way out. Then he spotted a drainage tunnel just a few meters away, small, dark, and narrow, but enough for them to crawl through. He motioned toward it. Go now. Emily hesitated, but another gunshot made her move. They crawled into the tunnel, the smell of wet earth and rust filling their noses, the sound of water dripping around them. It was pitch dark, but Dalton's phone light gave them a faint path. They moved slowly until they reached the other side, emerging near an old service road. Dalton gasped for breath, leaning against the wall, his suit torn and soaked. We have to keep moving, he said. Emily nodded, exhausted but determined. They walked for miles until they reached a small gas station on the edge of town. Dalton borrowed a coat from a kind old attendant and paid in cash while Emily waited near the vending machine. Trying to dry her hands, she noticed a newspaper on the counter. The headline read, Dalton Industries faces investigation for missing funds. Her stomach twisted. Victor was turning the story against him already. She handed the paper to Dalton, who read. With quiet despair, he whispered, He's painting me as the villain, Emily. This is worse than I thought. They knew then that time was running out. Dalton said, We can't meet Greyhawk in person. It's too risky, but we can drop the data somewhere. Safe, she thought for a moment, then said, What about the public library? There's an old system there. You can upload files without trace. He smiled faintly. Clever girl, let's go. When they reached the library, it was past midnight, the rain still pouring. They broke in through a side window and hurried to the computer room. Dalton connected the drive and began uploading the files. Emily stood by the window watching the empty street below. But then she saw movement shadows crossing under the streetlight. Black cars pulling up, she whispered. They're here, hurry. Dalton pressed a few more keys. Almost done, he said. But before the upload could finish, glass shattered as a bullet tore through the room. Emily screamed as Dalton pulled her behind the desk. Stay down, he shouted. She covered her ears as more glass broke, the sound of boots pounding against the floor. Dalton whispered, When I say run, you run, and don't look back. She nodded, tears mixing with rain from the broken window. He looked at the screen, 98%, almost there. Another shot hit the monitor, sparks flying. He slammed the enter key and yelled. Now they ran through the back door into the night, the USB gone, but the data sent to a server somewhere far beyond Victor's reach as they disappeared into the dark alley. Emily heard the distant wail of sirens and the roar of engines. She didn't know if they were chasing them or saving them, but she held on to Dalton's hand tight, because in that moment, running together through the storm, she knew the truth was finally alive and nothing could stop it anymore. The rain had not stopped, and the city looked drowned under the silver light of the street lamps as Emily and Dalton hid in an abandoned warehouse near the river. Their clothes soaked, their bodies shaking from exhaustion. Dalton leaned against a rusted wall, breathing hard, his eyes dark with worry. Emily looked around the empty space, the sound of dripping water echoing like a slow heartbeat. She whispered, Do you think the file's uploaded? He nodded weakly. They did. I saw it for a second before the screen went black. It's out there now. Maybe that's enough. But deep down he knew Victor would not fall so easily. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Police. Cars rushing past, but none of them for help. They were part of the same system. Victor controlled everything from the banks to the newspapers to the people who were supposed to protect truth. Emily sat beside Dalton, her voice trembling. What if they twist the story again? What if they say you did it? Dalton smiled faintly. They already have. The world believes what it is told, not what it sees, but sooner or later, truth finds light even in darkness. She looked at him and saw a man no longer rich or powerful, but human, broken yet brave. At sunrise, they left the warehouse, moving through quiet alleys, keeping their heads low. The streets were filled with posters showing Dalton's face with bold words, wanted for fraud. Emily felt a cold fear crawl down her spine. Every corner, every camera felt like an eye watching them. They reached a small cafe at the edge of town and sat in the back corner. Dalton said, "I have one last contact. Someone inside Victor's circle who owes me a favor. His name is Aaron. He works in data security. If he helps us, we can trace the servers that hold proof of Victor's crimes." Emily nodded. "Let's find him." By noon, they reached an old office building. Aaron was waiting in the parking lot. A nervous man with shaking hands and a tired face. When he saw Dalton, he whispered, "You shouldn't be here. They're hunting you," Dalton said quietly. "Then help me end this." Aaron led them inside to a small basement filled with old computers. The air smelled of dust and wires. He connected one of the drives and started typing fast lines of code flashing across the screen. He said, "Victor's deleting everything from his servers. He's cleaning his tracks. I can stop him, but I'll need time." Dalton said, "Do it," while Aaron worked. Emily stood by the door watching the street. She felt the weight of everything pressing down the lies. The danger, the endless fear. She remembered her life before all this simple, ordinary quiet. She had never wanted to be a hero. She only wanted to do what was right. Suddenly, she saw two black cars pull up outside her. Heart jumped. She turned to Aaron. "Hurry, they're here." Aaron's fingers moved faster. "Almost done," he said. Dalton grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the back exit just as the front doors burst open. Armed men shouting, "Spread out, find them." They ran through the narrow corridor, Aaron shouting behind them, "I'll send the data go now." The sound of gunfire echoed through the halls. Dalton and Emily burst into the alley behind the building, running through puddles and smoke, their lungs burning. They reached a narrow bridge that crossed the river, bullets splashing in the water around them. Dalton shouted, "Keep going. Don't stop." They crossed to the other side and hid behind a truck. Emily looked back, but there was no sign of Aaron. Only silence and the glow of fire rising from the office. She whispered, "Did he make it?" Dalton said quietly, "He gave us a chance." They walked for miles until they found an old church at the edge of town. The doors unlocked, the candles still burning inside. They stepped in and sat at the last pew, both of them shaking. Dalton rested his head in his hands, saying softly, "I don't know if this was worth it." Emily looked at him and said, "It was. You saved more lives than you think. Maybe people will see the truth now, maybe not. But you fought back, and that matters." He smiled, tired eyes shining with gratitude. "You sound like someone who never gave up," she said. "Maybe. I learned that from you." Hours passed and the city outside slowly began to change. Screens on shop windows flickered, showing breaking news. Unknown whistleblower exposes corporate fraud linked to Victor Lane, investigations underway. Emily gasped as she read the words. The files had gone public. The truth was spreading. Victor's empire was crumbling. Dalton stared in disbelief. The people who once called him a thief were now calling him a victim. He whispered, "It worked." "Emily, it really worked." She smiled, tears mixing with relief and exhaustion. "We did it." But before they could rest, the church doors opened. Heavy steps echoed through the hall. Victor himself stood there, his expensive coat dripping rain. His eyes burning with anger, he said quietly, "You should have stayed silent, Dalton. You ruined everything." Dalton stood slowly, blocking Emily behind him. Victor pulled out a gun, his hand steady, his smile thin. "You think the world cares about your truth? People forget, headlines change, but you won't live to see it," Emily whispered. "Don't." He raised the gun, and for a heartbeat the world stopped. Then the church lights flared. Police sirens screamed outside, voices shouting, "Drop the weapon." Victor froze, turning just as officers stormed. In guns raised, he tried to run, but they pinned him to the ground. Handcuffs snapping tight, Dalton and Emily watched in shock. One of the officers said, "We got your message. The data's been confirmed." "He's done." Dalton turned to Emily, whispering, "Thank you." She shook her head, "No. Thank you for believing in me, for trusting a waitress when no one else did." He smiled softly. "You saved me more than once." As Victor was dragged away, Dalton looked out the church window. The rain had stopped and light was breaking through the clouds. Emily sat beside him, her heart finally calm, knowing the fight was over. But neither of them knew what came next. Only that the truth had survived. And sometimes that was enough.